Okay. Jaime, can you please tell us what is your idea of good life or well-being, your personal perception?
I can approach this more from my own philosophical perspective. It's not something I tend to think of directly in my daily life, or let's say when I experience it in my daily life, if I think of the moments in which I feel well, for example, it's when I'm spending time with my non-human family, like cuddling each other, this kind of situation, I can clearly say, well, this is a moment of well-being and so forth. But I do think about it more from my philosophical perspectives, and then for me, well-being is clearly something that needs to be planetary and needs to be in the entanglement of the well-being of all life forms, which means I do think a lot about the fact that all elements that undermine personal well-being and human well-being are in fact coming from the systemic destructive impact that we are having in everything around us, including the entire planetary environment, all other life forms, and of course also many humans. So I do a lot of analysis about how this may have happened and how exploitation at large has created a massive disruption of well-being at a planetary scale. So for me then, well-being means trying to lead a life, which I actually try to do practically, myself, which can help overcoming this age of radical disruption of planetary well-being towards what some call planetary health, although this concept as it is normally used is still quite anthropocentric, because normally planetary health means the health of humanity, and I think it should mean the health of all life forms and of all ecosystems. But there's a lot of theorization nowadays of what health of an ecosystem is, and how the key role of biodiversity in it, and how does natural plague control happen, for example. No, this is an example to explain how I would think well-being in those terms. So as opposed, like we have invented pandemics because of our exploitation of life and our agglomerations and the way we block the transformation of matter in the biosphere through sedentary life. So if we understand how health in ecosystems, in non-degraded ecosystems happens, it's because of the free movement of everything, the animal, the seed, the microbes, the flows and so forth. This creates the ongoing remix of matter that is what affords the regeneration of water, of air, of soil, and of our microbes and so forth. So then this free movement of everything is for me the core of well-being. The free movement of bodies, which means the non-determination of how bodies move. This implies understanding how we have created a radical determination of how bodies move, and that is the source of pandemics, of anxiety, of obsessions of different kinds, of virtually every kind of systematic physical, mental and emotional pathology we can imagine. Not that there is not illness in nature, in non-degraded nature, but systemic, this prevalence of all sorts of systemic health problems of every kind, I think have to do with the way of life we have invented with sedentary exploitation of life. So regaining movement as a way of transforming our lives completely and regaining a more symbiotic sense of living with other life forms, so that we don't impose our movements on other life forms, so that we understand how an urban environment is an imposition that is destroying other life forms, that is excluding other life forms and so forth. Thinking through that, through moving differently, is for me the core for overcoming this age of planetary unwell-being, and is also the source for an incredible healing myself. So I think I have, I could say, although it's not the vocabulary I normally use, that I have improved my well-being enormously. I call it joy, through my movement practices. So the practices that are allowing me to transform, to share practices with others towards maybe overcoming this, or at least adapting in the process of the upcoming climate chaos, are the ones that are giving me an incredible joy of life, which I had more than ever before previously in my life. And I could associate that to well-being and to learning to live with others humans and non-humans in disaligning more and more. It's a lifelong process from the toxic systems of alienation that I think are at the source of how we undermine well-being for all of life. So that's my approach, and I think, yeah, that involves, I think, how I practically approach it also in my daily life to some extent.
Thank you. And reflecting upon the use of digital technologies, which I know that you use in your research, how do you think this technology affects your ideal, your well-being in general and in your experience, of course?
Yeah, so here again there's a difference between how I think, and I think a lot about how digital technologies are intrinsically part of this problematic system of alignments, as I call them, and this becoming algorithmic of the biosphere. So we are imposing this set of algorithmic movements on the biosphere, which I think are reductive per se and are intrinsically part of the mass extinction we are creating. So on the one hand, I have a deep critique of how well-being is generally undermined by digital technologies in their predominant form. Then I will speak about how I try to also reappropriate them. And so for me this goes well beyond things that are often studied, maybe not enough, but I think probably in your project you're doing a good job in that, in terms of understanding how the use of apps and smartphones and things like that are affecting the well-being of younger generations or less younger generations and so forth. And all that, of course, is important. I try to analyze the whole deep history of that in terms of how since the Neolithic we already had like proto-algorithmic forms of organization, of which the current digital society is just a further expression. So let's say the gridded cities in Greece almost 3,000 years ago, 2,600 years ago, the loom for the grid of textiles. For me, those are already proto-algorithmic kinds of organizations of society. Which are a precursor of what we have today, with microchips connecting gridded binary codes, choreographies all across the planet, which consume enormous amounts of energy, which align bodies with screens. So this whole question of immobility, for me, is one of the crucial critiques I do. So the way in which current digital technologies builds upon a millennia-long process of making us atrophied bodies. And we see this clearly in this age of well-being, bodies that are just clicking on screens a lot of the day. And we saw this, of course, in the pandemic now, how with working at a distance more and more, and so we are more and more confined in houses and just clicking on screens. And of course the whole ideal of some companies to have us just wearing permanent augmented reality glasses and just maybe lying down on some bed, this dystopian idea of, well, it's what Nietzsche was already calling the body despisers, right? The hatred of the body and trying to get rid of the body and to be just a mind which is immobile as a body. And I think this whole tradition is very much foregrounded in the tendency of digital technologies to completely take over and creating a complete double of the world, which is based on this hatred of the body and this alignment, this reduction of our movement spectrums and this impoverishment of our sensory experience. So for me this is a crucial aspect that affects everything else, how we think, how we relate, our affects, our societies and so forth. So then my take, since I've been working with these technologies since 20 years in all sorts of media art projects, but I see them as techniques of life more broadly, is about reintroducing this broader and more indeterminate moving body in ontohacking, as I call it, many of these technologies, which means in understanding how they are crafting our sensory architectures and our movements, and to redefine how we move with them and how we perceive. So not just to change one content of perception for another, not just to produce a new content for an app or for a film, but to completely redefine the perceptual relation we have with cameras, with screens and so forth, how we move, how we can move with them in new ways that bring back less immobile and more rich, more kinesthetic, proprioceptive, multisensory body, and collectively also. This is what we are also now doing with the Bodinus Horos project, to try to do collective practices even with telematic connections, but bringing back this indeterminacy and richness in how we move and perceive. However, I am focusing more and more on what the body can do without the digital, because I am more and more aware of how ecologically unsustainable digital technologies are at a deep level of even the extractivism of the rare materials that need to be produced, the coltan wars in Africa behind the metals in our pockets, and many other aspects, and also the general social unsustainability. Like, even if some of us try to hack these technologies, somehow the general mainstream use of them is highly toxic at a social level, at how it makes people highly dependent on things that are quite alienating, the algorithms that foreground hate in social media, all sorts of things. It's a hugely complex problem. So I try to regain more and more techniques of improvisation, collective improvisations that can be done just through what bodies can do, what I call body techniques, following upon the anthropologist Marcel Mauss, who was describing body techniques as the very rich and varying repertoires of movement and perception that bodies perform in many activities of life, so as a technique in itself. I try to focus more and more on that because I think it's the only ultimately sustainable or thrivable, that can support thrivability for all of life in the biosphere. Also because I seriously don't think there is much of a future in the digital in terms of the upcoming climate crisis. So I do a lot of also, besides my philosophical research reports around this from an activist perspective, I really go in studying the climate reports of the IPCC and the other United Nations organizations and many scientific commissions, and I have pretty much of a clear idea that we are running directly into the abyss, and this is an imminent collapse that I think we don't know exactly when and where it's coming, but some of us think that it's no more than a few decades that we are having extremely unimaginable situations, or maybe by the middle of the century, if not before. Everything is accelerating more and more. And the digital is part of what's creating that problem, even if some corporations try to give us the idea that AI is going to solve every problem in the world. I think this is a fallacy. I think it's just adding more problems to the problem, and that what we need is to go back to the body to relearn to live symbiotically in the world. Meanwhile, I do keep, because I've been doing this as a media artist for 20 years, I keep developing projects with the use of digital technologies, but with ever more skepticism in terms of its future. I seriously don't see that there is this fantasy of, this is the future, everything will be there, AI is going to be everywhere, and this will keep going on for millennia, for centuries. This is a complete fantasy. But, if it's going to go on for maybe 1 decade more, 2 decades more before industrial civilization collapses in climate chaos, in the meantime, we can continue hacking it a little bit and trying to make better uses of it. This is my current approach.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Oh.
Mm-hmm.